Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session, GitHub for Beginners. Sarah Guthels will be your speaker for this session. Before we get started, I wanted to please remind all of you attendees to take a look at the code of conduct that's in the chat. By participating in this session, you agree to that code of conduct, which basically means you agree to be nice to each other, to Sarah, and to everyone you would interact with here at Ignite. All right, take it away, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shanna. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Today, we're going to be going over some of the basics of GitHub. Now, I do want to preface this that I've been, for the last couple of months, doing an entire series on Git, GitHub, and other types of tools and features that might be relevant to your learning journey, and I will give you all of those resources. So this is meant to just kind of be a little taste into that. So my name is Sarah Guthels. I am a principal program manager here at Microsoft in the developer relations organization, and I focus on building content both in written form, like on Microsoft Learn, and I do weekly live streams and post weekly pre-recorded videos on various topics. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to show you is here on my screen. You can see that we've got this is my GitHub profile. So you can get to this by going to github.com/sguthels. And there's actually a link to how to create your own profile README in the resources that I will send to you all in the chat, or Shanna will, and I'll show you where to get them. But I just wanted to start here and give you all a chance to sign up for GitHub if you wanted to, because you'll get a chance to interact with what we're going to do today during the session if you are signed up for GitHub. I really like having this profile here because it allows me to just kind of tell people what I'm all about and link them to all of the places that might be relevant for why they might be coming to my profile. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you was that intro to Git and all of the other tools series that I was just talking about. So if you head over to aka.ms/learnwithdrg, that's me, /WYDLIS_videos. I said that super fast. Shanna will put the link in the chat, and I will link it elsewhere as well. You'll see we've got some pre-recorded videos and some live streams that are an hour long that go over Git, and we're just starting to get into GitHub. So I encourage you to check those out. I did want to do a brief intro into Git, just so then that way we're on the same page. Git is basically a version control tool that allows you to store different versions of the code that you're writing and collaborate with other people or yourself through branches and pull requests and merging and a lot of these other words that we're going to talk about today. GitHub, on the other hand, was built on top of Git or using Git. So GitHub has all of those features that Git offers, but it's essentially adds in an additional kind of project management side to developing code, a collaboration side to developing code, and a place to store your code securely on a server that GitHub, or if you purchase their enterprise edition yourself, owns. So then that way you can never be without your code, even if for some reason your computer just stops working. GitHub is the largest open source community, and as a result, you're going to get a lot of additional resources available to you beyond just the code version control tooling. So beyond just storing your code and creating branches and tracking changes, you're also going to get a number of open source repositories, which are basically projects that are available for anyone to take a look at, contribute to, add on to, or make their own versions of. We'll talk about that in a bit. I wanted to highlight this. This is the GitHub Flow. Shanna will put a link to the GitHub Flow in the chat. You can head over to aka.ms/lwdg/GitHub Flow to find this. This basically describes how GitHub intends for you to use the product. So first, you have this blue line here at the top. So that's kind of this like light blue line there at the top that's straight. So that's kind of like the timeline of the main repository, the main version of your code. Okay, so we have kind of a main version of our code. That's kind of that finalized version right there. And how GitHub intends for you to use the product is that before you make changes to that code, whether you're working on an open source project or honestly, even if you're doing things on your own, I highly recommend this. Every time I skip these, I always mess up. First, what you do is you create a branch. So this is basically saying there's that main branch, that main version of our code. I'm going to create a branch over here, and that's going to be a copy of the code at that particular point. So you can see that this is when we're creating that branch. People could have made changes over here. We don't know about that. GitHub's going to help us resolve those if it becomes an issue. But at this point, we're making a copy of that repository and putting it into our branch. The next step is to add commits. This is literally just making changes to the code. So adding code, deleting code, fixing code, whatever it might be. The next step is to open up a pull request. So when I first heard the word pull request, it didn't make sense to me because I was trying to get my code back into the main branch. So I didn't understand how pull had anything to do with it. If I took a second to think about the second word, request, then it did make sense. So the way that Git and GitHub work is at this point, way over here, when we do a merge of the branch that I was working on and that main branch over here, I am actually, the main branch is pulling this code into it. So over here, when I'm doing this pull request, what I am saying is, hey, main branch, or whatever branch I'm targeting, I'm requesting that you pull my changes up into that main branch. So then that way my changes are a part of that final product. So that's what a pull request is. After you open the pull request, there's going to be a series of discussions and additional commits. So sometimes the pull request looks perfect and people just say, looks great, approve, let's merge it in. Sometimes though, there might be a bug or someone might say, hey, there's a better way of doing this or a different way of doing this, or, you know, we need to add more documentation or whatever it might be. So we're going to have a series of conversations here around the code that you're trying to get merged in. Before merging any code, you always want to deploy the code to make sure that it's working. Now, I tend to work on just like information repositories at the moment where I might have some simple projects as sample code, but I'm not deploying an entire application or website or anything like that. So deployment isn't typically a part of my process. However, this is meant to kind of take the place of any kind of testing. So prior to merging into your main branch, you want to do any kind of testing that needs to be done. So that's verifying that it is the right changes, deploying it to like a dev branch or a staging website or something like that before you get it actually merged in. And then again, that final step is to merge that into the branch. So this is how GitHub works. The next thing I wanted to do is just go over GitHub. So if you did take that time during my intro spiel to get a GitHub account, then when you sign into GitHub, if you've been using it for a little while, this is what you'll see. This is the GitHub homepage. You'll notice over here in the top right that I've got my avatar, which is going to get me to a lot of my settings, a notifications bell that's going to tell me anytime I have things that are assigned to me. We'll get to that in a minute. And then this plus button if I want to create anything new. You'll see over here on the left-hand side that we've got a list of my repositories. This is going to be sorted by the ones I'm more frequently using. And you can see here in the middle that we've just got kind of recent activity on any repositories or my account. You can see someone followed me recently. So you can just kind of see all of that. All right, so in addition to GitHubcom, there are some additional tools that I recommend you trying out. The first one is Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is an editor, but it has a Git and GitHub, well, Git integration and a GitHub extension that makes it really easy to make sure that your code that is on your local machine in Visual Studio Code is always syncing with GitHub. If you're not using Visual Studio Code, you can also use GitHub Desktop, which I will demo today. This is basically a UI, a GUI, a graphical user interface, a kind of pretty button version of GitHub tooling on your desktop. It works on Mac and PC. And so I like it because I am switching between the two, and I can just always make sure that my repositories, whether it's a local copy, the copy that's stored up on the GitHub cloud, or my local copy on my other machine are all synced nicely. So if you want to follow along with exactly what I'm doing, I highly recommend downloading both Visual Studio Code and GitHub Desktop. All right, so let's get started. I do want to point you to this before I jump into making a new repository as a demo. This is, and Shanna will put the link in the chat window. You can also find it at aka.ms/talks/SPR-ignite-21. I like to say it out loud just in case. But this is basically my talk track or kind of like all of the resources for today's talk. So everything that I'm mentioning today, I have all of the links here for you. So if you miss anything that Shanna puts in the chat, you should be able to find it here. All right, so let's get started creating a new repository and just going through this process. I'm going to come up here to that plus button that we talked about, and I'm going to click on New Repository. This is going to refresh my window into, hopefully, okay, good, into this new page where I'm going to create a new repository. There actually is this feature called repository templates that allows you to create a repository that's a template. So if you have any kind of like application, or if you're building like a GitHub Pages, which is like a website version of information or something like that, you can create a template, and then you can basically create a repository based on that. It's going to have all the files and file structure and actions and everything in there, and then you can start from there. We're just going to start from scratch. If you do have like multiple accounts or multiple permissions on different organizations, you can change that here. I'm going to call this one Spring Ignite 2021. And you can add in a description, which I do highly recommend, always making sure, just like we comment our code, that we have titles and descriptions that are descriptive of what you are doing within GitHub. It's going to come in really handy later on, and I'll show you why. So this is my demo repo for Ignite Spring 2021. You can actually make your projects public or private. I'll make this one private or I will make this one public so that you can check it out if you want to. And I always recommend adding in a README file. README files are basically the first thing someone will see when they get to your repository. And I will point out some features that are useful for README files later on. Since I'm just going to be working within Markdown today, which is this language that basically allows me to write text with headers and links and images and things like that, I'm not going to worry about a gitignore file. A gitignore file is useful if you have things like swap files or temp files that get created when you are compiling or running on your local machine, to make sure that those don't get committed to the repository. We don't need those temp files as part of our primary project. And we can also choose a license. There's actually this really amazing licensing doc, and choosealicense.com. Shanna will put a link to that. It's a slightly different link, but Shanna will put a link to that in the chat. And this allows you to kind of walk through how you would choose a license in this case. So in this case, it can be simple and permissive. It's just something super simple. So I'll make it an MIT license. Perfect. It's going to set my primary repository, or branch rather, that big straight line that we talked about earlier, to be called main. You can actually change this in your settings. If you are going to change it, I highly recommend doing it right at the beginning, right when you create the repository. But this is what the main repository branch is going to be called. So let's go ahead and click on create. And this is going to take me to my repository. Let's explore it quickly here. So up here at the top, we can see that it's my repository. This is the name. We're on the main branch here, and we actually only have one branch. We're in the code tab, which is basically going to be this kind of like folder of all of our code. We have an issues tab, a pull request tab, and a bunch of other tabs that we're not going to get to in this talk today. Down here in the center, we can see that we've got this is basically like a folder structure. So in my repository, I've got a license file and a README file. And like I said, READMEs are the first thing that people are going to see. So right at the bottom of any folder on GitHub that has a README file, you're going to actually see that README file there. Here in the kind of like middle right, we can see these three buttons. You can go directly to a file if this is a really large repository. You can add a file by creating one or uploading one here. And you can click on this beautiful green button here, which we'll do in just a minute. There's going to be some other features that we're not going to get into in this talk today. But that's kind of the basics of what we're doing. So we've got this repository. The first thing I'm going to do is clone it. So I'm going to click on here, and we can see that when I click on code, I get a bunch of different options. And this is also somewhat dependent on, actually, it may not be anymore. It used to be dependent on which operating system you're in, but I think it's pretty agnostic at this point. So you can either clone using like command line interface or any other tooling that you use that might use HTTPS or SSH. There's going to be some documentation for that on using command line interfaces. You can open with code spaces if you're part of that beta program. Open with GitHub Desktop, which is what we're going to do today. Open with Visual Studio, or just download all of the code. So let's go ahead and open in GitHub Desktop. It's going to ask if I can open it. And it's going to open in GitHub Desktop for me right here. So this is filling it out automatically based on things that I've done in the past. So it's going to put it on my desktop, and it's going to call it the same folder name as what my repository name is. That sounds good to me. So I'm going to click on clone. This is GitHub Desktop. We just kind of jumped into it. I had installed it already, but if you're logged in, it kind of just jumps into it and it's ready to go. A couple of things here. Up here at the top right, we can actually change which repository. As long as you have let GitHub Desktop know about a repository, it'll show up here in this list. We can also change which branch we're on whatever repository we're on. And we can interact with the server, with the GitHub code or with our repository that's on GitHubcom here. This button will change depending on the state of our local environment. We can see over here that we have no changes in files. And what I'm going to do is just open up in Visual Studio Code. So when this happens, it opened on my other window, so I'll bring it over here for us. This is going to open Visual Studio Code with that file, or that repository. So we can see this is the Spring Ignite 2021, and here's my README file. And I'm just going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to say, let's call this Spring Ignite 2021. Looks like I made a typo here, so let's do that. All right. If you're unfamiliar with Visual Studio Code, right up here, this means that I have not saved the file yet. And until I save the file, I'm actually not going to see any changes here in GitHub Desktop. So I'm going to save that file now, Control S. So now the file is saved. And now I can head over to GitHub Desktop, and we can see that I have one change here. The really neat thing is, let's say that we've done a couple of other things as well. Let's go ahead and add one called sarah.md, and I'll say Sarah Guthels is the file about me. Save that. We can even maybe link to learn more about Sarah. Check out her page. A link here. I like to include everything in the link that might be relevant, and I think we can just do something like this. Perfect. All right, so now I have made a couple of changes. I have made some changes to the README file. Right here we can see a diff. So on the when we initially cloned our repository, brought it down to our local machine, this is what was there. We deleted both of those lines, essentially, and replaced them with these 7 lines here. Okay? And Then on Sarah.md, we can also see over here that readme.md's got this kind of dot and Sarah.md has this plus sign because this one just has changes and this one has a new file. This one's a completely new file. There never was any other file there. Let's go ahead and add some changes here. So we're going to say edited the readme and added the Sarah file. You can add a further description here. The title of that commit message is going to be very, very important because that's going to be the thing that helps you know if you need to roll back to a previous commit because what you just did totally broke everything. I'm going to commit directly to main because I'm just doing a simple project here, but I'll show you the branching in just a minute. Once I've committed, I have told Git / the GitHub desktop client that all of the changes, which is just this one set of changes, are going to be the ones that I want to push up to GitHubcom. So at this point, I can push origin, and you can see up here that that button was changing. And now I can head over to the repository, and I can refresh my page, and I can see that this README file has changed. And if I click on here, I can see my Sarah.md file. We can add one more thing in here. I don't know, something. Check out my main profile on GitHub at, and I'll just say github.com/sguthels. And then I'll do https://sguthels. All right. We can do the same type of, so we just made a change. I did that kind of fast. I just made a change in github.com rather than on Visual Studio Code. Okay. And now I can, again, commit my changes just right in here instead of on GitHub desktop because I am working on the github.com server, not on my local machine. And commit directly to the main branch. And now when I head back over to desktop and I click on fetch, it says, oh yeah, there's been a change. Would you like to pull that change down? I can say yes, pull that change down. And when I go back to Visual Studio Code, I can see that that new line has been added. So that's the basic flow for GitHub. I did want to point out a couple of other things before we get to questions in the next couple of minutes here. So one thing is that we do have a number of Learn modules that you can follow along with to get these kinds of overviews of GitHub and all of its features. You can find these at aka.ms/SPR-Ignite21/GitHub and /GitHub2. Shannon will put those in the chat. But these learning paths here only take a couple of hours. They're fairly straightforward, and all they need is a free GitHub account. So I encourage you to check those out. These are also the ones that I'm going through on my live streams. And the last thing I wanted to show you is my Talks with Dr. G repository. So Shannon, if you can put that in the chat as well, aka.ms/talks/SPR-Ignite-21 is going to take you to this page here. And here you're going to find a place to add in your note to our share board. So our share board right now looks like this. Only my colleague Megan has checked in with this fun GIF of Elmo. But if you click on this here, you can actually follow these instructions to add your own note. The steps to do this are to fork this repository, create an MD file in the notes folder, following the sample format, create a pull request, and then I will get it approved. To fork this repo, you just come up here and click on fork, and that will create a copy of it. We can actually check that out right now. Shanna actually forked this repo earlier and created her own pull request. So this is Shanna's version of my repo. So this is my repo, and she forked it. So this is actually her version of it. And what she did was she went into that folder, which is right in here. And she added in her own markdown file. The neat thing about that is once she did that, she was asked if she wanted to open up a pull request, which let me come back to mine. And GitHubcom will kind of walk you through all of that. And this pull request got opened, and she said she was adding her own note, and it was a note for me. I can take a look at it. She added this, have a great talk, with some hearts and a peace sign. I'm going to say, yes, thanks, Shanna, and I'm going to approve this. So remember the GitHub Flow, what she has done is essentially created a branch. She doesn't have access to my repo, so she had to fork it, but her version is kind of like a branch. And she's now asking, hey, can you bring my code into this? No problem, Shanna. Yes, I'm going to approve this for you, and I'm going to merge it. And now when we head back over to the ShareBoard, and we wait a couple of minutes because GitHub Actions have to run, hers will pop up here. So I highly encourage you all to head over to my repository, and you can find the instructions for how to do that on the intro to Git for Ignite. Just forking, adding in your notes file, create a pull request, and you're ready to go. One more couple of things I just wanted to say. Issues are very, very important for open source projects. This is the Visual Studio Code open source project, and issues are a way to track any kind of bugs or proposed changes and feature requests. When you are looking to potentially contribute to an open source project, a good thing to do is to search for the Good First Issue label. This is going to be a description of a bug or a feature that is really great for someone who is just getting started with that code base. So if you're new to the code base, check out that one. And then make sure that you understand that open source maintainers sometimes work for large companies like Microsoft, but oftentimes are doing this on their spare time. So make sure to include information in issues like screenshots or kind of like how to repro something. Make sure that you're responsive to the maintainers if they're asking you questions, and check out one of the more recent videos in the What You Didn't Learn in School series that I mentioned earlier, if you want to see Megan and I talk a little bit more about issues. And I'm going to leave you all with, head over to my profile, github.com/sguthels. You can go into the Talks with Dr. G page, and I've got all of my resources for Spring Ignite right here, which include all of the links to everything that you saw today. Any questions?
Awesome. Nice work, Sarah. Thank you. That was very informative. We did have quite a few questions. I was doing my best to keep up with them in the chat, but I know there's a lot I missed. I'll stay on a little bit after and try to answer them.
Also,
hopefully you guys
I'll be doing live streams and pre-recorded videos about GitHub for the next couple weeks. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at Dr. Guthels with any of your questions, and I will make videos for them and give you explanations.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. So we had quite a few people ask similar questions around branching strategy. Mm-hmm. So one person, Mark, asked if he's using GitHub for an individual project, what's the benefit of branching? Or other people asked questions related to branching, what are good branching best practices?
That's a great question. It really depends on what your goals are, what the project is. If I'm working alone, the reason I might use branches is to consolidate a bunch of changes all at once before kind of pushing things up. So I might want to sync all of my changes across devices and make sure that it's stored on the github.com server, while still allowing myself to not be fully done, right? So today, as I was kind of fixing up to the Talks with Dr. G repository, I was definitely just pushing to main quickly, but I would push to main and then realize I had a typo, and then had to push to main again and realize I had a typo, and then I had to push, and then that became very confusing, so I couldn't keep track of if I fixed all of the typos or not. So rather than doing that, I should have just created a separate branch that said last minute Ignite changes, made all of my changes, confirmed it was what I wanted to see, and then merged them into my branch.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. I'll do one more quick question. Someone asked, what is the difference between GitHub and GitLab?
Oh, great question. They're basically just two different servers, two different hosting providers. So GitHub obviously is owned by Microsoft, independently owned, but still under the umbrella. I actually used to work at GitHub prior to working at Microsoft. I wrote GitHub for Dummies as well. So I am just kind of, a fan of GitHub. I feel like it has the feature set that I'm interested in. But essentially, they're just kind of, the difference between VS Code and Atom, or the difference between, Visual Studio and now I'm forgetting the name, but the other larger IDE.
Yeah, Eclipse, maybe that's for Java.
Maybe that's what I was thinking, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. We are at time. Great work. Thank you, audience, for all of the questions. Really loved answering all of your great questions in chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Sarah if you have anything else that didn't get answered.
Yep, at Dr. Guthels on Twitter. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Shanna.
Yes, thanks.
Bye.